Welcome back, everybody, to this month's edition of From Enemies and Strangers to Friends, Overcoming or at least Navigating Cultural Divides and Differences. For those of you who have been with me for the last several months, you know that we've been looking at ways to try to find what I call cultural artifacts that help us connect with each other even amidst our political and social differences. And so over the last few months, we've taken a look at how that might be music, sports, films, even our pets, religion. We've talked about a lot of those things, and today we're looking at food and what we eat, and the menus and the dishes that represent us, and are things that can kind of put us on a footing where we can talk to each other, even if we're disagreeing with each other. Today, I am joined by Senator Capri Cafaro. Capri, I have to say, I was reading your biography, Senator, and I saw that not only did you go to Stanford, which in my book is just about the best university you can find anywhere. I think it's a phenomenal place. Not only you went there, but you graduated when you were 19, which I don't even quite know how to process that. But she graduated from Stanford when she was 19, and then she has a master's degree in liberal arts studies with a focus in international relations from Georgetown, and also a master's in social work from the Ohio State University. So a really great academic background, and served in the Ohio State Senate for 10 years, including a stint as the minority leader, and now is an executive in residence at the American University in Washington, D.C. So we're very happy to have you here, Senator, and thanks for taking the time. I want to start off by relating a quick story that I came across your book, which I want to mention more specifically and talk about in late October, when there was an article about the book in my local paper here in Bloomington, Indiana.
Great.
And I read it and I said, oh, that's interesting. I'm doing this vlog. I need to file this away. And so I took it out and put it in my file as something that I need to get back to at some point. And then 6 days later, there was this article in the New York Times. Of course, this is late October. It's just before the presidential election. And it's a quiz. I printed it out. It says, can you tell a Trump fridge from a Biden fridge? And I
I
thought, well,
remember seeing that article too.
this is pretty interesting. And the premise of it is, we were so divided. Well, if you look in somebody's refrigerator, can you tell who you're going to vote for? So I took the quiz and failed spectacularly, as did everyone in my family. And that was kind of the point. Everybody else did too. That by looking at someone's food, you didn't necessarily were able to tell of who you were voting for. And that gave me a sense of, I need to go back to what that senator wrote, because there's something more here than I even initially imagined when I thought it was interesting. So you wrote a book, United We Eat, and it was released in July of 2020. And I guess the obvious issue or the question is, why'd you write it? And it sounds like your book has some of the same objective as what I just described and what I've been talking about. But just tell us kind of, why'd you write the book, and how does it provide a way for people who might otherwise disagree to find a common ground with each other?
Sure. Well, first, again, thank you for having me join you and talk about, what I think is a very important topic, and that is, finding common ground. And in this case, using food as a tool to not only unite us, but as a tool of storytelling. So you mentioned obviously that I spent 10 years in the Ohio Senate, and during that period of time, I spent a lot of time working across the aisle, trying to pass bipartisan bills. The Democrats, I'm a Democrat, were in the minority and have been actually in the minority in the Ohio Senate since 1984. So if you want to actually pass legislation and do it in a meaningful way, you need to be able to work with the majority, and not let the perfect get in the way of the good. So, I did all kinds of things, from Medicaid reform to, health insurance reform issues, and everything in between. And when we would have bipartisan victories, what I would do, I've always been a baker. As you can tell from my name, I'm Italian. I grew up, cooking and baking with my grandmother, like many people do, particularly, folks that are, from Southern and Eastern Europe, tend to have these really rich culinary traditions that they pass from generation to generation. That's not to suggest that others do not, because they certainly do. But in my case, I'm Italian and Ukrainian. So, but I also make pies. I love to make pies. I feel that it is a symbol of Americana, and frankly used to do it as well to enter into county fairs and festivals and this sort of thing. So I would always bring in a pie, bringing together our Democratic and Republican offices to celebrate bipartisan victories, cooperation and collaboration, and build fellowship really in a more casual manner. So from that, I thought that it would be a good premise, particularly given how, divided our nation has been and continues to be. How can we try to tell the story that, there is one thing that can unite us all, and that is food. It's something we all need to eat, that we, generally speaking, all love to eat, right? Many of us like to cook. So I sought out to, first, my intention was actually to get 25 Democrats and 25 Republicans, which actually proved to be a bit difficult simply because, and I know this as a former elected official, we all work on, political time, right? So you can say, yeah, this is fantastic. And then months pass and you don't get the stuff you need. And so it just became logistically difficult for me to do it. So, which actually in some ways actually was a benefit to me at the end. So about 24 of the recipes, so almost half of them, were submitted by Democratic and Republican current and former political leaders. Of that group, it's pretty evenly divided between Democrats and Republicans. And then the remaining 26, plus one, including District of Columbia, were recipes that I actually adapted myself and did a lot of research on the individual states, on their agricultural output, on their cultural makeup, to try to, develop recipes that would be reflective of that individual state's culture and tell those state stories. So when I reached out to these political leaders, I also wanted them to share their own stories of how they've used food to bring people together, as not only a tool to, bring people literally and figuratively around the table for discourse, but also as a common denominator. And so I often say, you may not like you may not like the person's politics that it's in the book, but you may like their recipe, and that's a start. Making them human in a time where we see, people as us versus them.
Right. That's great, and you make me feel validated in a couple of ways right off the bat. One is that I'm not necessarily that good of a cook or baker, but the one thing that my mother, growing up on a farm in Western Illinois, did teach me to do is to make pies. And so I am the pie maker of the family. And every time we move into a new neighborhood or something like that, it's Dad needs to make a pie, or we need to get Dad needs to make. So I love this idea of pie making in particular being the thing that is the key to outreach here, or at least one of the keys to outreach. So you validated that. But the other thing is in your very first or second sentence, you talked about storytelling. And for those of you who have been with me in this vlog, you know that last month we had Kristen Hahn, who is the executive producer of Apple TV's The Morning Show, and who's been a longtime friend of mine. And we talked the entire time about the importance of storytelling and how it humanizes us and how it provides us with our narrative of who we are, as well as finding out what characters we play in other people's narratives as well. And right off the bat, you're using food in exactly that kind of way to not just taste something, but behind that tasting, behind that culinary enjoyment is a story. And so, and I know that in the book, and you were just describing that you have recipes from all the states. I mean, it's representative in the true sense of the word of being from all around the country. So I was wondering if there's any particular favorites that you have, or any particular favorite stories of those that were submitted to you or that you adapted that you might be able to share.
Well, there's a few, certainly. I mean, the one that comes to mind immediately is Nevada, which is one that I adapted. There's two that I'll bring up that I did. One is Nevada's. And when I was doing research on Nevada, and usually, as I said before, I'm looking at agricultural output, what their sort of cultural dynamics, immigration patterns, all these sort of things, right? The true American studies major in me has, really came out in this process. And so, I was having a real hard time because everything that was coming up with Nevada and food was like the all you can eat buffet in Vegas. And I'm like, this is not a thing.
Right.
Like, I can't yes, I guess culturally, it certainly does tell a story. I mean, Vegas is a very important part of Nevada, but like, that's not how you can't turn the all you can eat buffet into a recipe.
Right.
So I kept digging and found that because of the silver mines in Nevada, there was a significant Basque immigrant population that came and settled in Nevada for the silver mines and left a cultural mark on the culinary landscape of Nevada. There's still a Basque food festival apparently. And the other thing that I was able to find was that Nevada produces onions. So what I did was there is a special way that Basques prepare beef. So I did a Basque style filet with caramelized onions as a way to bring those two things together. That immigrant heritage due to a specific industry being the silver mines, and then an agricultural product of onions, bringing those two tastes together to tell something a little bit different than, free crab legs, at the buffet.
So you did that one yourself, though. You adapted aspects of Nevada yourself and put it into your own kind of, this is Nevada kind of, that's really interesting.
That's right. So, and I have 25 other stories just like that. Very similar to, I was also very determined not to have a bunch of like stereotypical recipes of Chicago deep dish pizza or, Philly cheesesteak from Pennsylvania. So, I drew upon the Pennsylvania Dutch, the Amish culture for a specific like sweet and sour green bean dish. I also, from Illinois, have something called the Horseshoe sandwich, which was Lincoln's Horseshoe sandwich because it was actually created by a hotelier and chef down in Springfield, Illinois. And the reason why it's called the Horseshoe sandwich is because it's a ham steak that is in the shape of a horseshoe. It's usually open faced, so I cut it with fries on it or potatoes. I updated that concept with sweet potato fries and a Swiss cheese sauce. So just kind of again digging deep into the history of some of these things. A couple like interesting stories like from people that submitted. A lot of people did actually submit their mom's recipes. Governor KIV of Alabama, her recipe for gooey cake was her mom's. Former head of the Democratic National Committee, Donna Brazile from Louisiana, of course, had gumbo. It's her mom's gumbo. Former Senator Alphonse D'Amato of New York, Republican, although I was his intern in the 1990s. So I guess my bipartisanship starts way early. But I frankly, I mean, Alphonse, as much as he would, he would probably, I don't even know how he fits into the current day Republican Party. That being said, he and I are both Italian American. He had his mother's lasagna recipe. And he has a pretty extensive story about how, he would basically have his mom's, his mom essentially would cook or they would make her recipe and they would always have these weekly or monthly luncheons bringing people together, and that sort of thing. A lot of governors talked about that as well, about how, being a governor, having to have solutions, bringing together both sides in the legislature. And I can vouch for that, having served for so long on the state legislature and recognizing that you do have to find solutions. So a lot of our governors had those kind of themes. One final funny story, former Congressman Patrick Kennedy of Rhode Island, he submitted a recipe for pasta fazool, which is a hearty kind of minestrone type of Italian soup, which was really, well, obviously Patrick is Irish. Rhode Island has a very substantial Italian and Italian American population. There's a whole story behind why he picked the specific recipe that he got from somebody that he knew for years, having lived in Rhode Island. But then I got my congressman, Tim Ryan of Ohio, also submitted his grandmother's pasta recipe. And I was like, oh man, what are the odds of getting 2 of these? So I actually went back to Tim Ryan and I was like, look, man, you got to give me something else, because like I can't have 2 pasta ones. And like Patrick got here first. So I looked through the list and I was like, where do I have holes? I'm like, I need something that is more vegetarian, and I'm missing things in breakfast. Figure it out, Tim, because I've known him for so long. So that's how Ohio, of all places, and our community, which is very ethnic for Southern and Eastern Europe, ended up with zucchini and eggs, just totally random. And my hometown is like, how did Tim Ryan and why did Tim Ryan give you this weird zucchini and eggs thing? And I was like, here's why. He gave me a different recipe and I asked him to come up with something else that fit that plugged a hole and where I was short on recipes.
Your book sound, or putting together your book sounds like putting together legislation. I mean,
yeah, well, you know the old saying, right? It's, you don't want to know how the sausage is made. Right. And there definitely is, you pull back the curtain and there's definitely a lot of work that goes into, and I'm sure that you can say that for anyone that I've had a chance to speak to that is particularly that have done cookbooks. There's a lot of work that goes into it, from, research, recipe testing and the rest of it. But then I have this sort of extra layer because I'm dealing with these other folks that submitted recipes as well.
Well, just listening to the personalities and the people you mentioned had contributed and stuff, I mean, it really gives an interesting flavor, shall I say, as a pun, flavor to the politics behind it, politics in the great sense of the bipartisan nature of the different people who are submitting stuff to you, and that in itself is educational. And I think that was just really fun to listen to as you were talking about of all.
Well, I'm glad that I've amused you.
So talking about the political dimension of this, and I know you've told me already some really great stories. I hope I haven't exhausted all of them, but I know that when you're in the Senate, and I know that at the end of a legislative session, or if you'd had an accomplishment that you might celebrate with some sort of a feast or pie or something like that. But were there any other kind of examples where you were able to use food or sharing of food as a way to broker disagreements or celebrate, within your day-to-day work as a legislator?
Well, I mean, certainly the pie example,
right.
is the number one, thing. But, I think that the funny part too, I just as a side note, I think that, many of us, when you serve with other people for long enough, you kind of know what their sort of snacks and habits are and everything. So like, for me, everybody knew that I was all about Diet Coke and Sour Patch Kids. So I literally, we have term limits in Ohio. So when my term ended in 2016, I literally got a box from the executive director of the Joint Legislative Ethics Commission, which I served on for 8 years with my 10. I had a big thing that said Senator Cafaro's, kit to I don't know, to legislating or something like that. And it was literally like Sour Patch Kids, like Diet Coke, like Red Bull. But I'm not the only one that was like that had this. So this type of thing, when one of our Senate presidents was term limited, Republican Tom Niehaus from the opposite side of the state, they pranked him on the floor with like a bunch of people like coming out onto the floor with like Diet Cokes on trays and this sort of thing. So everybody sort of has their thing. And again, I think that it really does, when, whether it's, very, very late nights doing the budget, which, we'd go far, far into the night and into the very early mornings, and you'd go into the members lounge and there'd be like piles and piles and piles of pizza boxes and that sort of thing. That, food is a signal. It's a signal to say that, you can let your guard down. And I think that that's always what I found, because it is a social tool.
Sure.
And you don't necessarily have to have alcohol involved or anything like that. It's, somehow the barrier between being on the floor of the Senate, and waiting around for hours for amendments to be drafted or whatever, and you're sitting in the members lounge with pizza, all of a sudden you're having a much more casual conversation, a much more approachable conversation. And that approachability, I think is a very important part of, what food does. I also think, again, as a legislator, and particularly in Ohio, even though I came from a slightly more industrial part of the state than, for example, the side that borders Indiana, I still had a pretty significant rural community that I represented, a huge Amish community. I served on the ag committee for a number of years. And so, I think that this also the recognition of the role and importance of agriculture, of food production, of access to food, food security, food deserts, all of those things from a legislative perspective, they're also very bipartisan. You don't often see Democrats and Republicans saying, you know what, we're not going to give any appropriations to, the Ohio Association of Food Banks. No, it's
Right.
one thing that people can agree on. And I would say agriculture is very similar. Even if you maybe don't represent agriculture, you respect the fact that the agricultural sector is a very integral part of our economy. And we have to rely on our farmers and respect our farmers because they are part of, we don't eat without them. And so I think that, from a policy perspective, I think that food is also a unifier and a bipartisan policy issue.
Well, as you're talking to an old farm boy and from Western Illinois, and so this is music to my ears to hear all this. But it's also true. I mean, if I reflect, growing up, I mean, there was always any gathering had food to it. I mean, it's a social icebreaker. It's something that you share, and it humanizes everybody, regardless of what they may bring to the table other than the food. And I guess that brings me to my last question, which is, most of us aren't going to be serving in the state senate or the House of Representatives or those kinds of things. And I think that the experience that you have shared is terrific, and it provides us some really good reasons for us to think of how we can make use of something so natural to our lives in order to, again, find ways to interact with each other. And with that in mind, and with the country so divided, I mean, we're doing this in mid-January 2021, and our country is divided. And for all of us, regardless of where we are, what we're walking in life, or what our jobs are, what our careers are, do you have any reflections or advice of what any given one of us can do in order to utilize your technique in order to make our lives a little richer and to make our country work a little better and be a little stronger and find this common ground that we have as Americans together?
Well, not to continue to use the food puns, but I certainly don't have a secret sauce to all of this. I mean, I think that it starts with being willing to listen.
Yeah.
And I think that, because people are, come around the table and we often talk about Thanksgivings in particular, as you have all these different, people from the family come around the table, and inevitably there's some sort of, political meltdown conversation that occurs and that sort of thing. And I think that, it's important to try to shift that conversation. And, and look, I'm guilty of it too. I get very passionate. I am surrounded by people in my life that have very diametrically opposed views politically. And, it gets difficult sometimes to, take a deep breath and to try to hear them out. But, I think that it is important to, try to see what unites us before what divides us. And I think that what's happening right now is we immediately jump to us versus them, what divides us. And we need to reverse that. And again, I think that, in the context, at least of my experience with the cookbook, has been food is something that by default unites us. But it's also something that is non-threatening and humanizing. So, I recall, when I had spent a number of years doing political commentary on Fox News as a Democrat. And so so I was on Fox right as this book came out, and I talked about the fact that both Donna Brazile and Mike Huckabee are in the book. Now, they're two Fox News personalities, one Democrat, one Republican. And people were like, oh my God, they're tweeting at me. Donna Brazile, I'm not buying the book, Donna Brazile. And I was like, whoa, guys, you're missing the point. The whole point is, I get the fact that you probably don't like Donna Brazile, but do you like gumbo? Because if you like gumbo, then at least let's, focus on that. And then maybe if you're willing to see them, do you have a family recipe, that has been passed down, like Donna Brazile's gumbo? Well, all of a sudden, oh yeah, well, I have a, this, that, and the other, I have a lasagna recipe that's been passed down. Well, see, she's not the boogeyman. She's not, she's not the other. She's just like you. You just happen to disagree with her politics. And so it's those one thing after the next of that sort of thing, of trying to recognize that we are all the same. Culturally, we have something in common, and that is this issue of tradition and culture passed down through food, whether it is Donna Brazile's gumbo or Alphonse Tomato's lasagna. But that is a human connection that people can see, that isn't just, oh, she was the head of the Democrat committee, and oh, he was a Republican. Why is a Republican in New York, or whatever, and that was really, I think, the goal. And I think if you can find that humanizing factor, it's hard to demonize people when you can relate to them.
Could not agree more. It's a great insight, great book, United We Eat. And where can people find it if they're listening to us?
Well, it's currently available on Amazon,
okay.
And it will be available in the next few weeks, actually, at retailers nationwide as well.
Okay. Great.
Including independent booksellers, which is very important.
That is very good. This was a terrific conversation. Thank you so much, Senator. I really enjoyed this. This has really been one of my favorites. And unlike many of the other people that I've interviewed I've known many of them for 10, 20 years or so. We've just met because of this. And this has been just a really great, I'm delighted that we got a chance to meet, that this provided a reason for us to do it. And I just think that your idea of your book is terrific. I think it's spot on. And thank you so much for writing it. For the rest of you, thank you for joining us, and we'll see you again next month.
Thanks.